thank you so much for joining us today for Science Gallery Bengaluru's fifth exhibition season, Psyche. For those of us who are new here, Science Gallery Bengaluru is a public institution for research-based engagement. Psyche is our exhibition season that unravels the complexities of the human mind. Today, we're very pleased to have with us a team from the Lincoln Center for their event titled Music Supports Memory, Lincoln Center's Performances for Adults with Dementia. I'd like to start off by introducing Miranda Hoffner. Miranda is the Associate Director of Accessibility at the Lincoln Center for Performing Arts, where she drives initiatives to increase accessibility and inclusion for visitors, staff, and artists, including performances for individuals with dementia, job readiness programs for young people with disabilities, and disabled artistry performances. She's actively involved in the accessibility field as former chair and current steering committee member of the Museum Arts and Culture Access Consortium. Miranda also has her BA in Anthropology and English from the University of Vermont and an MA in Museum Studies from New York University. Miranda also has a team of colleagues with her who she will be introducing you all to in a brief bit. Before I hand over to Miranda, I would like to tell you a bit more about the programs coming up in this last weekend of Psyche. Do join us later in the evening for Unpacking the Creative Process, a workshop by our experimental Jyotsna Iyer today at 8 p.m. Or you could also join us for a discussion between Jyotsna Dhawan and our director, Janvi Falke, today at 8 p.m. on creating a cultural conversation on science. I'd also like to remind the audience that there will be an interactive Q&A at the end of the session. So please do type your questions in the Q&A box or interact via chat during the session. And you can also fill in the feedback form in the chat to tell us more about what you enjoyed about the program and what more we could do going forward. Now I'd like to hand over to Miranda.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon and good morning in time for us in New York City. We're coming to you from New York, and we're so incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to share our work this morning or afternoon. I'm going to share my screen now. Today we're going to be sharing information about Lincoln Center Moments, which is a program for folks with dementia and their caregivers that is performance-based. My name is Miranda Hoffner. I'm a white woman in my late 30s. I have red curly hair and I'm wearing a black headset, and I'm in an attic space. There's a sloped wall behind me and a plant. And I'm sharing that as an image description for folks who are blind or have low vision that may be joining us. And we're going to demonstrate some best practices around accessibility within the context of this session. So for the next 90 minutes, we'll be exploring how arts-based programs support people with dementia and their caregivers. We will be using Lincoln Center Moments, a performance-based program at Lincoln Center as a case study. And to our knowledge, this is the first program of its kind. And our hope during this session is that you will better understand how access to the arts is truly vital to the lives of everyone, and especially those living with dementia. And we know that this provides a really important opportunity for social connection, engagement with past hobbies, and a means of self-expression, things that all of us need. Through applied research, this session focuses on the intersection of science and of dementia and the arts. We'll hear from several different perspectives, the perspectives of a researcher, arts administrator and artist, educator, and participants to gain an understanding of this program's impact. And then we'll end with some of our forecasting of where we think the field is going and what opportunities there are in this area. Lincoln Center Moments began in 2016, and the program has always been offered for free since its inception, which is really important for us to remove cost barriers for everyone, and particularly this audience. This year, the program is accessible financially due to generous funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, public funds facilitated by the New York City Council and the Geriatric Mental Health Initiative, and gifts made by individuals who are participants of the program or their families are. And this year there's a gift from Alfred R. Horan in memory of Alfred R. Horan. And this session is really designed to share how arts programs support happiness and well-being. and how these programs can connect to folks' remaining strengths, and why this is really a meaningful program for participants, facilitators, and artists. With that said, we really want you to be your full selves as participants. We will be asking you to participate in the session. We hope that you do via chat and in the comfort of your homes. But we want you to act as yourself. We want you to participate in these activities as yourself, as your full self. We do not want you to sort of try on what it feels like to have dementia. It's really important for you to come sort of as you are. So we are incredibly lucky to have incredibly talented presenters as part of this session. You'll be first to hearing from Ariel Lever, who's an access educator with our program. She's been with us for many years, and we're very grateful to have her leading us in movement this morning. Then we'll be hearing from Dr. Evan Shelton, who's the Innovation Officer for the Center of Applied Research in Dementia. And then Arielle and Justin Poindexter, who's the Director of School and Community Programs at Jazz at Lincoln Center, will discuss how their perspectives have influenced the program and how the program has influenced their work. And then we'll be hearing from some of our participants through video interviews, and we'll end with a Q&A. There's a photo on the screen right now of one of our most recent sessions. This took place last week. We had Mark Morris Dance Group presenting a really remarkable and beautiful dance piece with live piano. And in the photo, you can see some of the dancers on a stage on the right-hand side with a piano accompanist in the background. And then you can get a sense of what the program sort of looks like. So there are several people sitting in socially distanced pods. Some folks use wheelchairs. Some folks are seated in chairs. They're of varying age levels, mostly older adults, and they are watching the performance. As I mentioned, the agenda today, we're going to have a welcome activity, then we'll have an introduction to dementia and its connection to music. We'll have an interview with artist and facilitator, perspective of participants, and then outcomes, impact, and future of the field, followed by a Q&A. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ariel to lead us in our introductory activity.
Hi there. It is so great to be in virtual space with you all. My name is Arielle Lever. I am an access educator with Lincoln Center Moments. I will do a visual description of myself as well. I am a white woman in my early 30s. I have dark brown curly hair. It's quite long, just past my shoulders, and it is wet because it is morning here and I recently took a shower. I'm wearing a navy blue long sleeve top, and behind me is the cherry wood cabinets of a kitchen. And the section that I'll be doing with you all is an invitation to participate in a warm-up activity. This is an activity that is pulled from one of our past programs. And in this activity, we'll share a bit about ourselves, and we'll also activate our sharings in a movement activity. So it's to give you an idea and a picture and sort of the kinesthetic experience of what it is like to participate in one of our programs. Throughout, I will also give some context to try to give you some more information about how the activity connects to our practices and also the why behind why we are incorporating certain elements. As we dive into this more interactive portion, I will tell you what we tell all of our participants, which is to join me in this activity in a way that feels good to you today in your body. As we know, people access activities in many different ways. So some options for participation is in the movement portions, you can participate using your body in movement. You can respond in the chat, and I'll be asking some questions in the chat and would appreciate those folks who can respond in the chat to share about themselves. And then, of course, there is always the opportunity to watch and observe. So this particular activity is from a workshop that's centered around art and themes of identity and home. And In this portion, we'll start to learn a little bit about each other, again, by answering some questions and prompts, because our program is very much about centering art making and art exploration, but it is also about having a social experience. There's a lot of isolation among adults and individuals with dementia, and potentially for their caregivers as well. And so this is moments, these kind of activities really are about sharing and connection, in addition to making art. So let's dive in. I'm going to ask you to please respond in the chat as you are comfortable to some prompts, again, around this theme of identity, this theme of home. And the prompts are, I am. You could respond about a role that you hold in the world, or a descriptor word. Maybe that describes your personality. I'll give you a few examples of what this could look like or feel like. For example, for me, some I am statements that are true to me is I am a mother, I am energetic, I am short. Those are all things that are true about me. Another question and prompt to think about and reflect on and to share if you're comfortable is I am from. I am from New York City, for example. And so that might be the response to that chat. If you want to be a bit more abstract in how you're responding, it could be a way to describe where you're from. Maybe you want to get poetic with it, like I am from the city that never sleeps, for example. And then last but not least, our final prompt is home feels like. Home feels like what? Is it an emotion? Is it a taste? Is it the taste of a dish that reminds you of home? Is it a smell, a sound? Really tapping into this idea of sensory experiences. An example for me is home feels like salty ocean air. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. And I'm going to give folks in this space a minute to really think about these prompts and to answer. There's going to be a moment of true silence, and this is very important to give folks, for our participants, to give people real processing time. Oftentimes we might ask questions, then rush to an answer, and it's really, really important, especially in Zoom, where it might feel hard, at least for me, to have silent space, to really hold that empty sort of silent space for people to process and reflect. If you are in the space with someone, please talk about your responses, collaborate together, have a discussion about your responses. So I will pause for a moment, again, asking folks to respond in the chat to these prompts, and I'll share my example in the chat now. I'll bring us back together in a moment or two. All right, this is Arielle speaking again. I encourage folks who might still be thinking or reflecting about their prompts to take your time to do so. I also really, I don't know about you, but I felt the impulse that maybe the room was ready, but I always like to leave that beat just a moment longer, because I think it's really important to feel what it's like to really give time and space and what that feels like in the room. So I'm starting to see some responses here. I'll read them out loud. Miranda says, I am a mother. I am from a small town and now live in a big city. Home feels like sleepless nights. Justin says, I am a musician. I am from North Carolina, but I am also a New Yorker, and home is where my family is. Justin says, I am a musician. I am from North Carolina, but also I am a New Yorker. Home is where my family is. And I'm seeing, I am short. Another short folk in the room. Hello. I am from many places, but also from none. Home feels like a slow song. I am playful. I am from Kerala, India. Home feels like canopies of coconut palm fronds. I am responsible. I am from a lazy city. Home feels like a nice nap. I don't know about you all, but I already am starting to feel very connected to people who I don't even know, who are continents away. And thank you. I just really appreciate people sharing honestly. And there's poetry in here already. There's deep poetry happening in the chat. And so what I'd like to do right now is to take some of these responses and use them to generate movement. So we'll take our sort of written responses and turn them almost into this movement poetry. Hopefully that represents some of the things about our homes and our identities. Before I move on, a few other just practical things that I want to point out that we've done is that you'll notice on the slide that we have the prompts written out. We always make sure that there's a visual reference because folks may be processing the instructions verbally as I'm giving them, but they also might need that reference or to be able to respond back to it. And it's really, I try as much as possible to read out as many responses as possible, just to give that feeling of being seen and heard and acknowledged. And I also just try to model, which you've seen, throughout, just giving examples. There are some more responses coming in the chat, so I'm just going to take a moment to read these because they're really, really great. I am curious about the world. Home feels like the smell of rain. I am jovial. I am from the seaside. Home feels like a warm hug. All right, so I am going to just sort of take this last response as sort of our first impulse for movement. Home feels like a warm hug. And I'm going to generate a movement that represents a warm hug. With our participants, we would typically be all in the same Zoom room together and would be asking participants to embody responses themselves and would be pulling from responses directly. Because I can't see all of you in the Zoom room, myself and the other collaborators and presenters who are here will be trying on the movements, and we hope that they feel reflective of the spirit of your responses. But that's a slight difference of how this is going than it might go in our Zoom room. So a warm hug. For me, a warm hug is a big movement. It begins with my arms outstretched. And if you are watching at home and feel moved to, please follow along with me in your body. So it starts with arms outstretched, and it's slow. A warm hug for me takes time and sort of ends in an embrace, maybe with some side to side movement. And if full body movement is not available to you, that's okay. You can do a hug with your hands. We can sort of isolate into a part of our body and just embody this same movement, sort of moving from side to side, but having an embrace just with our hands. You'll notice that I always try to offer a large body movement and then a small body movement because physical access might be different for all of our participants. So our first movement, a warm hug, let's do that together. Again, that other option. Great. All right, Miranda, I'm going to ask you, could you please, since it was your response, can you show me a movement that represents sleepless nights? Great, so I'm noticing hands coming together by the head, eyes closed with a jolt awake. We can all try that. With a jolt awake. Great, thanks so much for sharing that, Miranda. Great, so now we have two movements. Let's try those together, beginning with our warm hug. Side to side. Into sleepless nights. Jolt awake. Great. And I'm also noticing, I'm starting to notice expressions. So if sort of that's what you want to lean into and you don't want to do the full movement, that's okay. We can really just focus on the expressions in our faces. Great. And then I am going to, okay, I'm curious about the world. Evan or Justin, will one of you create a movement that represents this idea of being curious about the world? Oh, I'm seeing both of you going like this just already. Great. This is actually a really interesting moment of collaboration where we're starting to see people working off of each other within the Zoom room, which sometimes does happen in our room. So I notice, again, we're really working with our hands a lot, like a flat hand and palm over the forehead, and then a slow from side to side scan of a room. All right. We could do this for a very long time, but we're going to focus on these three movements for right now as sort of our movement sequence, and we'll put them together once more. You can follow along with me. Great. And before we end, I'm also going to have us do this once more, but with music and different types of music, because today is not only about exploring practices for adults with dementia, but also we're thinking about music. So we're going to see what happens when we take these two movement sequences and we do them to different types of music. So you can just follow along with me. Give me a moment while I get sound set up. Great. We're going to do this one more time, but to a very, very different style of music, and sort of think about and notice how it feels different in our body with different music. Wonderful. Thank you. We can all take a deep breath in together and release it out. Thank you again for sharing all of those bits about yourself, for joining in movement. Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Evan from CARD.
Hello, everyone. Miranda, if you don't mind pulling the presentation back up. So my name is Evan Shelton, and I'm with the Center for Applied Research in Dementia. And the Center for Applied Research in Dementia started working with the Lincoln Center in the winter, fall of last year. And we've been working with them on how to create more engaging sessions for individuals with dementia. And the work that we primarily do, we do quite a bit of applied research. We also do a lot of training for long-term care communities. We help long-term care communities create environments that are welcoming to older adults with cognitive disabilities. We help them create programming and systems that respect the dignity, equality of their residents. And as it so happens, my doctoral research was in the benefits of music for persons with dementia. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to me. And I think it has a lot of power in terms of building and maintaining quality of life for persons with dementia. So if we can move to the next slide, I wanted to start briefly about what dementia is, because I think there are a lot of terms around dementia and cognitive disability, especially related to aging, that sometimes get muddled a little bit. And I think when most of us hear the term dementia, we think of memory problems and confusion linked to old age. And while it's true that the majority of causes of dementia tend to increase in prevalence with age, there are a wide range of causes of dementia. I think a good way to think about this is to think about it using the analogy of a fever. So a fever is not a disease itself. A fever is this collection of symptoms, including things like high body temperature, feeling achy, feeling chills, maybe getting sweaty. But there can be a wide range of causes of a fever. So it might be that we have an ear infection that's causing a fever. It could be a side effect of some medication. It could be COVID, right? There are many, many things that cause this set of symptoms. Similarly, dementia is a set of symptoms, and it's a set of symptoms related to the mind. So this can include things like trouble remembering, general confusion. It could be trouble communicating, finding the right words, disorientation, whether that's to the place you're in or the time that you're in, difficulty accomplishing tasks that were once familiar, and really other difficulties related to thinking and memory. And similar to a fever, where there are a variety of underlying causes, there are many different conditions that cause dementia. The most common, and which is very closely linked to age, it grows in prevalence very significantly as we get older and older, is Alzheimer's disease. But there are many other forms of dementia, including Parkinson's dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia, and so on and so forth. Can we go to the next slide, please, Miranda? Now, many of these causes of dementia are progressive. That is, there's no cure and they will get worse over time. However, they're not all progressive. So some things can cause dementia. For example, extreme vitamin deficiencies can create symptoms of dementia, and that's a condition that's fairly treatable. There's a condition called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is an accumulation of fluid in the brain. It's treatable through surgical intervention, and so it's reversible to a large extent. The dementia that I'm going to talk about today is really this progressive dementia that's caused by some kind of underlying disease or pathological process. And depending on what that underlying condition is, and depending on the person, the progression is going to look really different from one person to another. But generally speaking, and especially with Alzheimer's disease, these are the kind of things we can expect as the progression goes forward. In the early stages, individuals start to notice some trouble with their short-term memory, remembering what you did yesterday, what somebody said when they called you on the phone, those types of things. What was I doing when I came into this room? You can't remember. Disorientation, so not remembering maybe where or when you are. Trouble finding the right words, and usually this starts fairly mild. So if you've ever experienced what we call the tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you know what this thing is called, but you just can't quite pull the word from your memory, that's a good example of some of the early stage symptoms when people start experiencing cognitive decline. Now, I'll say that some of this is these are things that we all experience to some degree with normal cognition. It's normal to forget occasionally. It's normal to become disoriented every now and then and to struggle to find the right word. To the extent that these symptoms represent dementia is the extent that they're interfering with our daily lives. So as we start to have more trouble with short-term memory, more trouble with orientation, maybe these things will start to impact our daily living. And so in the early stage or the middle stages, you'll see these symptoms worsen. We tend to have more challenge with language. Also in middle stages, behaviors are common. Behaviors like repetitive question asking, maybe things like wandering or collecting things, hoarding things. These are linked to dementia insofar as they're kind of rooted in the confusion that's associated with dementia. And then difficulty with activities of daily living. Typically, this starts with instrumental activities of daily living. So things like cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry, shopping. We'll see progressively more difficulty with those types of tasks. And then in the later stages, more personal activities of daily living. This could be things like dressing, bathing, even to very fundamental personal activities like eating and swallowing, incontinence, and the behavior changes in later stage tend to become more prevalent as well. Many times in later stages, apathy and depression are more common. But again, this is very different from person to person. If we can go to the next slide, Miranda. So when I go through all of these symptoms and the things that change throughout the progression of dementia, it's easy to automatically assume that, wow, this is really just a horrible condition. It's just flat out terrible. But we have to be careful with this because, like a physical disability, cognitive disabilities don't preclude a person from living a quality life, from being happy, from finding enjoyment and purpose in their day-to-day. In fact, we know that persons with dementia can be happy. And I think this is something that is not easy to see as an outsider. A lot of this, I think, is due to the way that we perceive memory and cognition. So in our society, in the US especially, I'm not as sure how this is viewed in India. I'd be interested in kind of exploring that. But in the United States, we very highly value our ability to remember and to think quickly and be creative and so on and so forth. When we think about dementia in the United States, unfortunately, it's often thought about as a medical condition. So dementia is viewed through this very highly medicalized lens. Typically, that means that individuals who are diagnosed with dementia are thought of as patients or as sufferers. And the symptoms that are associated with dementia are really thought to be driven purely by these internal factors, the disease process itself. That's really not a great way to think about dementia in terms of finding ways to create quality of life for people who've been diagnosed. At the Center for Applied Research in Dementia, we really look at dementia not as a disease, but as a disability. And when we think about dementia as a disability, instead of focusing on, gosh, this is progressive, there's no cure, there's no medication that can reverse this, there's nothing we can really do for you. If we think about it as a disability, we can say, this is, a condition that you're going to have to live with. This is progressive. However, we can focus on the things that you can still do. We can build on those, and we can create roles and activities and ways to engage based on your remaining strengths rather than focusing on the losses. So in dementia, we know that there are a variety of losses. But for those of us working with this population, it's really our responsibility to look past those deficits and look instead for the remaining strengths. So if we can move ahead here, Miranda, we'll talk more about those remaining strengths. I like to break this down into 4 categories. So we've got sensory skills, motor skills, social skills, and cognitive skills. Sensory skill is a great place to look as like a first line area for remaining strengths, right? These are things like hearing, smelling, seeing, touch. And many of these things last very long into the process of dementia. Hearing, we're talking about music today, is a very important remaining strength. With the exception of people who have lost their hearing or have gone deaf, we can engage people through music. It taps into a remaining skill. Through motor skills, if people can still do things with their hands, can they hold things? Can they do long learned procedures? And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. The activity that we did at the beginning of this, that Ariel led, is all about imitation. That's a remaining strength in dementia. In fact, we often train caregivers to use imitation to accomplish care tasks. So if we want somebody to brush their teeth, instead of saying, okay, put the toothpaste on your toothbrush and brush your teeth, we can model that hold a toothbrush, imitate the action of putting the toothpaste on, and imitate the action of brushing. And it's easier for a person with dementia to follow along when they're imitating a visual thing rather than trying to follow verbal instructions. Social skills. Can the person give an opinion? Can the person carry on a conversation? Can the person say no? That's a very important social skill, right? And then cognitive skills. Can a person read? It's something that is very long lasting in dementia. Oftentimes people assume that reading is something that goes early, but it's not. It's something that is very hardwired into us. When we look at a word, we automatically read it. It's something we can't look at a word and try not to read it because it's such an automatic part of our cognitive processing. And we can use that in dementia to create signage, to create name tags, to invite people to interact with their environment in a meaningful way, using this remaining strength. And so all of this is about finding the things that remain and tapping into that to create engagement and meaningful roles for persons with dementia. Okay, so let's move forward again. I want to dive a little bit deeper into how music is a remaining strength. So I mentioned that sensation, hearing, is often a remaining strength for those who have not lost their hearing. It's a great way to engage persons with dementia. So first of all, music makes us feel good. We have this circuit in our brain called the reward pathway. It's associated with a neurotransmitter called dopamine. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of dopamine. Sometimes it's called the feel-good neurotransmitter. When we do things in our day-to-day lives that feel good, whether it's eat a good meal, we go for a jog and we're feeling kind of that exercise high, when we listen to a song that we really like, all of these things trigger this response in our brains in the reward pathway. Our brain releases dopamine. It says, hey, I liked that. I want more of that. And it's overall this very pleasurable experience. Music also is really powerful when it comes to reducing anxiety. There have been some really fascinating studies on the other end of the lifespan in early childhood for children who need surgery. They use their favorite music to help prepare them for surgery and reduce their anxiety. And it's very effective. In fact, they found that for children after the operation, when they're enabled to listen to their favorite music during the recovery, they recover faster than those who don't. So really interesting effects of music on not only our mental health, but on our physical health and recovery. For any of you who are musicians, there's an added benefit as well. First of all, learning to play music is kind of like learning a different language. And so it creates what we call cognitive flexibility and builds cognitive reserve. So we are less likely to get dementia as early if we've got this added cognitive reserve, something that we can get through learning, whether it's music or another language or mathematics or whatever it may be. Keeping the brain active and flexible is really powerful for general brain health pre-dementia. And also, for those of you who are musicians, you've probably learned to play an instrument or sing using your hands and your body and your voice. And these are procedures that, when practiced regularly throughout our lives, don't just go away with dementia. If you've learned how to play the guitar or play the saxophone, for example, even after you have dementia, some of those abilities are going to remain. Your hands know what to do. So being able to draw on those procedural memories with dementia can be a great way of creating engagement and meaningful activity. Musical memory is also a remaining strength. And this is where I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about what's kind of going on in the brain and why this is such a powerful thing in dementia. The songs that we use or that we learn throughout our lives get very well embedded into our long-term memory. And when we hear those songs, the songs that we know so well, backwards and forwards, that you know every word, you know every melody, those are the songs that when we hear, immediately reconnect us with the memories, the emotions of the times in our lives when we heard those songs for the first time. The link between hearing that song and the emotions and the memories is very long lasting, even very late into dementia. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is from a study from Jacobson and colleagues in 2015, and they were really interested in learning, why is it that persons with dementia are still able to remember songs so well that they've known their entire lives? Why is it that this isn't something that's lost in dementia, much like maybe short-term memory is lost? So what they did was they asked healthy individuals with quote unquote normal brains to undergo neuroimaging. So they put them in an MRI and they asked them to listen to music while they were undergoing this MRI. They had people listen to songs that they had never heard before, and they looked at activation patterns in the brain. And then they asked people to listen to their favorite songs, and they looked at activation patterns in the brain. And these areas that you see in this image in the red and yellow are areas that were differently activated between the two groups. So this was kind of the difference between the unfamiliar and the very familiar listening in terms of what's happening inside the brain. So if you can see this pattern in figure A, this is the region of the brain that they identified as important for connecting familiar music with memories and emotions. So this is their region of interest for musical memory. If we can go to the next slide. So what they did with this region of interest, which you can see here in the top row of this figure, is they wanted to see what's happening in this region in the brains of persons living with Alzheimer's disease and related forms of dementia. So through a series of different neuroimaging strategies, they looked at gray matter atrophy. So this is the tissue in the brain, in the cortex, the outer part of the brain. They wanted to see, is this tissue, is it dying? Is it decreasing in volume? They looked at hypometabolism. So metabolism is the body's process of using glucose for energy. In the brain of individuals with dementia, certain neurons can have more trouble using glucose, metabolizing glucose. So they looked at this, and they also looked at beta amyloid burden. So if any of you have heard of the plaques and tangles associated with Alzheimer's disease, the plaques are a very important biomarker for Alzheimer's. We tend to see a large accumulation of these tangled proteins in the brains of individuals with Alzheimer's. And what they found was that gray matter atrophy was very low in the musical memory region of the brain. The brain was not shrinking. The cells in this area were not dying. Hypometabolism, also very low. This region of the brain didn't seem to have much of an issue metabolizing glucose. The cells are using glucose and energy the way they're supposed to be. However, we do see beta amyloid deposition. There's a lot of these biomarkers of Alzheimer's in this region of the brain. So what this tells us is, yes, Alzheimer's, this pathology is very much here. It's certainly present, but for some reason, and we're still not 100% sure why this is, this region of the brain seems to be fairly resilient. It's not dying. It's not having trouble using glucose. And so the ability to remember long learned music, to be able to connect that with emotion and with memories is very strong. And so for if any of you are really kind of keen on these brain regions, these are the pre-supplementary motor cortex and the anterior cingulate gyrus. The anterior cingulate gyrus is really well connected with emotion and memory as well. So I think we can move on to the next slide. And so because of this really long-lasting connection with personalized music, it's been used a lot in the dementia literature. And research has found that it can increase engagement, can increase participation in things like group activities, like the Lincoln Center Moments program. When people are listening to music, it increases their willingness to be social. It increases vocalizing, talking, singing. It can reduce agitation. And it can also be a really powerful tool for caregivers to help do all of these things. When caregivers have this tool in their tool belt to reduce agitation, improve mood, draw on long-term memory, there's this really great collection of positive effects that we see from using music. So all in all, this to say, music is a very, very powerful tool for persons with dementia, especially relaxing and highly learned music, familiar music, that draws on the remaining strengths of persons with dementia and circumvents the deficits. So with that, I'll turn it over to Justin.
Yeah, hi, it's Miranda. Thank you so much, Evan. That's incredibly helpful to have that context, especially what's going on in the brain in such a thoughtful presentation. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to bring back Arielle and also invite Justin Poindexter to join us. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Justin Poindexter. I'm the Director of Schools and Community Programs for Jazz at Lincoln Center. And I've been working with LCPA, with Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, for, I guess, nearly 12 years, doing programs for people with Alzheimer's and dementia, and also programs in nursing homes through the PSPD programs that we used to do together. So thrilled to be here and talk a little bit about our process on our side about how we program these concerts.
Great, thank you so much, and good to have you back, Arielle. So there is a slide up right now on the left-hand side. It says, how is this program different? So I'm going to ask a few questions to sort of examine this idea. And then on the right-hand side is a performance that Justin curated that was remarkable and magical in so many ways, and it features jazz singer Marian Cowing, who is holding a microphone, and there's a participant singing along with the performance. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. And the first question I have is, I'd love to hear about what considerations you have for this audience and how it may or may not be different than the other programs that you offer. And I'd love to start with Justin.
Sure. I think that this program has probably informed a lot of how I program other programs, for lack of a better word. I think in most programming that I do, we program about 650 concerts a year at Jazz at Lincoln Center. There are artists that have particular aptitude for certain audiences. Following up on what Evan said, familiar music, jazz, or at least an American popular song, which a lot of jazz is based on, is the music of many of the people that we encounter in these concerts. It's the music that they grow up with and the music that they know. And if they don't know the song, there's a kind of predictability or an expectation in how these songs kind of function that is familiar and fun. I think also the swing rhythm that is the basis of jazz, the emphasis on 2 and 4, the is a good feeling rhythm in our bodies. And I always get, I mean, no matter what audience you play for, I always get a kick out of the minute the drummer kicks in, you can kind of see the audience do this little mini bounce in their seat, which is a good sign. The language of the music tends to be blues based, and that it is emotional and is expressive and sort of designed to get reaction out of the audience. The hosts that I think of for these concerts, or the band leaders, are people that, I mean, sometimes they reach out directly saying, you know, I like, for instance, Marion is particularly skillful at working with this audience and very good at it. But it's nice to have people that have a, for lack of a better word, kind of an old school entertainer je ne sais quoi about how they approach a microphone, that this audience tends to react, and honestly, most audiences tend to react positively to. I think, you know, there's a whole lot of sort of criteria that go into how we might program this concert, is I guess what I'm saying.
Great, thank you so much. And Ariel, after the concert, we do workshops based on the performances, and that's really a time for processing. It's a time for community engagement. It's taking sort of the context and the feelings that people have from the concert or the performance into a more intimate workshop interactive setting. I'm curious about what considerations you have when planning those kinds of workshops and engagement activities.
So some of the things that I'm thinking about are, first and foremost is just offering multiple entry points for all people. All of our participants come into the art in different ways, both like physically, but also in terms of their interests and their learning styles. Like we all have different learning styles and ways that we like to process information. So something that I know that I and all of sort of the facilitators at Moments are thinking about is how we can just offer all of these different moments and options and opportunities for people to engage, because engagement can look different, and just to be able to honor lots of different types of engagement. So that might mean that we, you know, that we have, like we did today, a really movement-based and kinesthetic portion, that we have something that's more discussion-based, or that might be more exciting for people who really want to process through sharing and story or language, and also having art making activities. Again, all of that's really important to be able to sort of like flex, because also some people really tune out and do not like the art making activities, for example. So it's about having all of those options within the plan, but then also being able to flex in the moment to give sort of one-on-one offerings to people in the moment, so that they can remain connected to what we're doing, even if it's not something that they are sort of like traditionally actively engaging with. So that's one of the things that I think a lot about. And also just, I think it's about cultivating moments of like joy and spontaneity and social connection. Like at the end of the day, like we can get really, really deep into like pedagogy, but I think that it's also just like about providing that space for folks. And so making sure that balancing our really clear structure and practices with also that space, especially now, like coming out of COVID, I think, or not out of, in between COVID. I think that it's really important to have sort of those like spontaneous sparks of, you know, human connection and moments for people. So also making sure that there's room for that too.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Justin, I'm curious, we've done so many concerts together. What stands out to you? What experiences surprised you?
Well, there was this one particular moment that I really latched onto, and Marion was the singer at this concert. This was quite a few years ago, where we were performing, and there was a man in a wheelchair, and he started singing along with Marion on a Cole Porter song, and the people around him, you could tell that something unusual had happened, and this man had very advanced Alzheimer's disease and hadn't spoken in 6 months, but somehow sang along with this song. And you know, that was sort of early when in our collaboration together, and made me realize really just the wonder of this music, the potential that music has with its audience. It also is a strategy that I think we've been employing more over the past few years, is to bring much older musicians into these programs. The space that you have is a program that easily accommodates people that have mobility issues, and we're able to meet them in the parking garage and help them out. So, Fred Staten, who played until he was 102 years old, did a few of these concerts. Bill Crow, who's 94, is on the next one that we're doing. We're bringing some great gospel people from North Carolina who are octogenarians coming up. I mean, it's, I think for us, presenting a concert that is racially as well as diverse in age and gender is increasingly important to us in all of our venues, but in these as well.
Yeah, that is such a unique and I think really remarkable approach that you have around programming, and incredibly important because, in addition to folks who have dementia, so many older adults have this feeling of being more and more invisible in society as time goes on. So I think, centering older adults as musicians, as artists, as performers is incredibly important for visibility, for making people feel more connected to society. So I think that approach is really vital. Ariel, I'm curious if you've had any sort of moments of joy and surprise in the work that you've done with us.
Definitely. I'm going to share a few. You could already start to see that they just like make me feel a certain way when I think about them. But I think it was actually my first Lincoln Center Moments performance. This was in person that I had ever experienced. There were a few audience members that were watching a musical performance. They were moved. They sort of like got out of their seats. They were dancing. And that did not necessarily seem rare or exceptional. But one individual sort of went towards the center of the aisle and walked down the aisle. And one of the musicians, it like came out and off of the stage, walked up to the audience member, and it almost looked like they knew each other. And there was this moment among the whole audience where I was like, what is happening here? And essentially the musician recognized the audience member as a great musician, artist himself, and said, I don't know what the exact quote was, but said something like, just, you were one of the greats, acknowledging this audience member as the artist that he was and is. And that was so powerful for me because, speaking to the comment you just made, Miranda, about sort of the invisibility, like, I think it's really important to hold on to, these are our audience members, our participants as like the people, the artists, the full people that they were and still are. And that was like a really, really impactful moment. Something else that really strikes me, and this is an example from the virtual space, is there is a couple who has come to our program for a very, very long time. And every time that we ask a question, I feel like I get like, I'm revealed something more about their relationship, their romantic relationship. For example, I think we asked the prompt that we did earlier today, like, what does home feel like to you? And the husband responded, home feels like my wife's lips. And I remember just being like, so sort of like struck by that response. It was like not what I was expecting. And I think it's like important to be surprised. And again, reminded of like the full parts of the people who are in the room, which is they are adults who've had rich romantic lives, for example, and that they want to share those parts of themselves in community settings too. And so that always sticks with me as a moment of surprise. Yeah, the last story I'll tell is there is a woman who, again, you can tell that we have a lot of artists in our space, but who really does respond when we do the visual art making, and often will sort of finish the visual art making and she will just still be in virtual art making sort of until the end of the session. She's just like in her visual art. And one time, because it was virtual and we were sort of in and had this window into people's home space, that her care person that was with her started bringing in and showing all of her art. And it all of a sudden became clear and was revealed that, again, you know, thinking about these people as the great artists, like this great visual artist who was in the room that we honestly, if we weren't in their home space, like may not have otherwise ever known. Those are just a few anecdotes.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And the examples that both of you gave really emphasize this idea that Evan shared about remaining strengths, right? So it's really, it's very reassuring that the way that the program is set up really supports this idea of tapping into remaining strengths. I'm wondering, before we go to the perspective of the participants, Justin, do you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to share about your approach to this work or the influence it's had on other aspects of your work?
Sure. I think increasingly we look as how can we help out the artists themselves on stage, particularly after these past couple of years, which have been very challenging for us as musicians. How are we supporting our musicians? And what you said about remaining strengths, some of the artists that we bring in, it's not always, wow, can you believe how great she can still play at 90, whatever. Some of the artists that we work with have obvious signs of decline. Either in their performing or in other areas, but it's important for the culture of our music, which is largely an oral tradition, that we keep people that want to be active in it. So yeah, I think we just try and be encouraging in that. For instance, Bill, who is a remarkable bass player at 94 years old, will be doing some styles of music that is not really what he's well known for. And I think we're just as excited to see what Bill's take on playing more contemporary R&B and gospel will be. We're just excited to see how he's going to approach that as someone who is really well known as a swing bass player.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. So we are going to wrap up our session in just a moment. I'm going to play a portion of a very short video now that has a perspective of some of our participants. And I want to thank Ariel and Justin for your contributions and discussion here. So I'll share my screen. I'm going to show a video that we took last week at one of our programs. And I'm going to show just a brief, the first 2 minutes of this clip.
How do you feel about today's performance?
How do you like today's performance? How did you like today's performance? How did you like the dance?
Today,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed this performance of the beautiful people. The surroundings I knew when it was just nothing. I've been living here all my life. And this is one of the things I will always remember.
We love that. Next question was, why are these programs unique?
Why do you like these programs? Why do you like the programs? Why is it so unique to you, the program, the dance?
Like the what?
The program, how did you like it? Why did you like it?
the performance was by very grateful, graceful people. I loved it. I really loved it. It's one of the things I'll remember.
And are the arts important in your life?
Is art important in your life? Is art important in your life? Is it important in your life? Art. Is art important in your life? Art. Art, the dance, is it
yes.
important?
I like all these performers who are so graceful, who entertain me, and in the surroundings. I've lived in Manhattan all my life, but it's been very few times that I had the pleasure of sitting here and hearing all these very artful people entertain me. Sometimes I don't realize my age, but I feel like a little butterfly. It feels so good to watch them. You forget how old you are. You almost feel like you're part of them.
Great. And I think that's a lovely note to end on. That is what we're going for. We want to focus on remaining strengths. We want to make people feel a sense of community and connection. That participant is 104 years old. She celebrated her 100th birthday in a program with us 4 years ago. So it is remarkable that we're able to have folks like that who have so much experience share with us in the room. So I'll close now and then we will go to Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Miranda. That was an amazing point to really bring the session to a wrap. The only thing is we might just keep, we probably might skip the Q&A right now because we've kind of run over time and we do need to close the session. But maybe we could just do one really quick question that we got, which was, what is the role and where do you sort of situate caretakers and caregivers within the system? So, of course, there are the, people with dementia themselves, and there are you as the artists and the facilitators. But how are you sort of bringing caretakers and caregivers within this, network that's happening? So maybe you could tell us very briefly about that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So the program is designed for both people with dementia and their caregivers. And the focus is it as an opportunity to come together as a dyad, as a group. So it's really important for us that we have opportunity, we have performances that are engaging for multi-generations. We have opportunities for people with and without dementia to participate in art together and to have that kind of social connection. We know that it is important for respite for caregivers to have some art breaks in their lives. So much of their daily lives are really challenging. And we also know that there is a great opportunity when you experience art together to see things in the person that you love who is impacted by dementia that you may not be able to see in your daily life, and that reconnection and cementing the relationship. We've seen incredible comments from caregivers about the power of the program.
I think that does make a lot of sense, and I think it's really important. I really hope that we would be able to have more programs like this here as well. I haven't heard of many over here, but I hope that this kind of session would be inspirational to, for people who are trying to take this further. So I hope that, people who might watch the session later on would be able to, reach out to you to better understand the kind of program that you're doing and how they might, bring it to different contexts, where, and of course, not in all these contexts, we may not have the same kind of infrastructure or the resources that are available. But I do believe, like you said, that it is the concept itself, right? Like it is about music and being able to have that shared experience. So I think that is something that can translate across boundaries, across situations as well. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here today and sharing this really wonderful program with us. And again, it does make us think so much more about a community that we don't often talk about, right? And we don't often think about in this way. So thank you so much for provoking this conversation today. And especially for the really fun session at the start, that was really fun. Thank you so much, Ariel. We really enjoyed that. And I'd like to just tell all our viewers who are watching this that if you did not manage to attend the session live, you can always check the recording on the YouTube channel. And if you missed any of our previous events, you can see that on YouTube as well. There are a couple of interesting programs that are still coming up. If you like this program, there is a workshop on the 14th of May titled Can Stories Improve Our Mental Health? So do come along for that. And we have a lecture on the 7th of May titled Neuroaesthetics and the Neurobiology of Beauty. So that will be something interesting to see. We heard a lot about the brain and music today, so I'm sure that will be something that will add on to this conversation. I just would like to remind those who did join us to fill in the feedback form and register for our programs and see the exhibition before it closes. Again, thank you so much, Miranda, Justin, Evan, and Ariel. It was a pleasure having you here and listening to you about your work. Thank you so much for joining us.